Today we'll conclude our lesson in chapter 14 about enlightenment and revolutions, and we will explore two primary source documents about the declarations of freedom. Just to give you a quick recap about chapter 14, it's all about enlightenment ideas, and enlightenment ideas is all about human rights that are natural, such as freedom and equality. As you are getting your books ready, I would like you to see this presentation of the Declaration of Independence from TED Ed Animations.
All men are created equal, and they are endowed with the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not so fast, Mr. Jefferson. These words from the Declaration of Independence and the facts behind them are well known. In June of 1776, a little more than a year after the war against England began with the shots fired at Lexington and Concord, the Continental Congress was meeting in Philadelphia to discuss American independence. After long debates, a resolution of independence was approved on July 2nd, 1776. America was free, and men like John Adams thought we would celebrate that date forever. But it was 2 days later that the gentlemen in Congress voted to adopt the Declaration of Independence, largely written by Thomas Jefferson, offering all the reasons why the country should be free. More than 235 years later, we celebrate that day as America's birthday. But there are some pieces of the story you may not know. First of all, Thomas Jefferson gets the credit for writing the Declaration, but 5 men had been given the job to come up with a document explaining why America should be independent. Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams were all named first. And it was Adams who suggested that the young and little-known Thomas Jefferson join them, because they needed a man from the influential Virginia delegation, and Adams thought Jefferson was a much better writer than he was. Second, though Jefferson never used footnotes or credited his sources, some of his memorable words and phrases were borrowed from other writers and slightly tweaked. Then Franklin and Adams offered a few suggestions, but the most important change came after the Declaration was turned over to the full Congress. For 2 days, a very unhappy Thomas Jefferson sat and fumed while his words were picked over. In the end, the Congress made a few minor word changes and one big deletion. In the long list of charges that Jefferson made against the King of England, the author of the Declaration had included the idea that George III was responsible for the slave trade and was preventing America from ending slavery. That was not only untrue, but Congress wanted no mention of slavery in the nation's founding document. The reference was cut out before the Declaration was approved and sent to the printer. But it leaves open the hard question: how could the men who were about to sign a document celebrating liberty and equality accept a system in which some people owned others? It is a question that would eventually bring the nation to civil war, and one we can still ask today.
Have your books ready, or go ahead, log into Lodi Unified School District website, and from there, from the right side, the corner, you should see Clever, and from Clever portal, go ahead, log in, and you will see Cengage Learning from the left side, and log in with your student account and password, and it will lead you to the National Geographic Learning Resource, which is our world history book. And from there, from the left side, Unit 5, Chapter 14, Enlightenment and Revolution, Section 2, Two Revolutions, and 2.5. It's a document-based question about the declarations of freedom, pages 396 to 397. This chapter's essential question, Chapter 14, is how the new ways of thinking about government and human rights led to revolution. and the objective is to synthesize information about human rights from primary source documents. A lot of the Enlightenment thinkers were also prolific or gifted writers. Through books, essays, and other documents, they explain their ideas about rights and liberties to the world. Now, this writing set the stage for revolution. In other words, these writings provoked, encouraged people to revolt against the existing government during this time. Just like this first primary source documents that was written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. I've mentioned, or it was mentioned in the past, that most of the founding fathers of the United States, like Thomas Jefferson, were heavily influenced by Enlightenment thinkers such as John Locke and Baron de Montesquieu. For example, in the Declaration of Independence, human equality and natural rights were emphasized, and these are obviously Enlightenment thinking ideas. Now, since this is a primary source document analysis, let's take a look at an excerpt from the Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration of Independence, we find this, and I will read. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, there are a lot of big words in just the first sentence. Say, for example, self-evident. It means that they are obvious and endowed, given, unalienable rights, things that cannot be taken away. Those are unalienable rights. Life, liberty, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness, or the desire to be happy. Moving on, he said that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So Jefferson is saying that the government exists because the people allowed it to exist. So in other words, it is just by the permission of the people that the government has power over them. Therefore, if the government becomes abusive of its power, then the people who put it in the first place can take it away. Moving on, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. So you see that Thomas Jefferson is saying that the power belongs to the people. It is the people who created the government. Therefore, it is the people who can alter it or change it. Or if necessary, it is the people who can abolish it and establish a new form of government. Question: how did the ideas of John Locke influence the creation of the Declaration of Independence? Now, in order for you to answer this, you can go to lesson 1.1 and 1.2 of this chapter 14, section 1.1 and 1.2 about enlightenment, and go ahead find John Locke. You can also watch the TED presentation again because it was mentioned in the presentation about the ideas of John Locke influencing the Declaration of Independence. Now let's go to the second document. It is the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of Citizen, 1789. So this was written for the French people. The first one was written for the Americans. Lesson 2.2 to 2.4 is all about the French Revolution. Now, if you will look at the excerpt below, Article 6 emphasizes every citizen's equality before the law. This article reflects the ideas of Rousseau. Now let's take a look at this excerpt. It says, law is the expression of the general will. Every citizen has a right to participate personally or through his representative in its foundation. The first statement is saying that every citizen has a right to participate, to be part of the government that represents him or her. Moving on, it says it must be the same for all, whether it protects or punishes. All citizens, being equal in the eyes of the law, are equally eligible to all dignities, high offices, and to all public positions and occupations, according to their abilities and without distinction, except that of their virtues and talents. In other words, the last statement is all about equal opportunity to work in the government. In other words, people need to hire or elect individuals to work in the government based on their talents alone, based on their qualifications, and not because of who they are or their relationship to, nobility or the clergy. The reason why this was written or explicitly put in writing is because during this time, a lot of people are in the government and they occupy important position in the government even though they are not qualified for that. The reason why they have those positions is because of their connection to, for example, the French monarch or the noble class or even the clergy, the church. So, in a way, this is like saying an equal opportunity for everyone, and the basis for getting the job is just the qualification in the virtues of talents alone and abilities. Now, let's take a look at the question. Why do you think the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen emphasize the Enlightenment idea of equality? So those are the two primary source documents. The first one is the Declaration of Independence for the Americans, and the second one is the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen for the French people. Now go back to our Google Classroom and open the Review and Assess assignment to Revolutions, Chapter 14, Section 2, and answer those questions that I just read a while ago. Don't forget to fill up the basic information, the last name, first name, class period, date, and there's a key vocab here, declaration. Just put the definition of this word, this key vocab, and don't forget the title of the lesson. And of course, if you want to get the full credit on top of the correct answers, be sure that you are using your own words and you are writing in complete sentences. Once you're done with this, since this is the last lesson, go ahead, be sure that you answered all the review and assess questions, and don't forget to turn it in. So that's our lesson for today, Chapter 14, Section 2.5, Declarations of Freedom, the Declaration of Independence, and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen.